Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Alan Stevens. Alan, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I live here in Australia, just north of Sydney, so in a country town. I'm a grandfather of six grandchildren now, four grandsons and two granddaughters, and three boys or sons that I raised on my own. And I've been spending the last 20 years or so working on building better understandings of people, in the last 12 years reading faces. So profiling people to understand their personalities and their emotions and being able to build stronger relationships.
Yeah, I watched some of I want to say seminar videos, and it was where you were sort of illustrating walking towards someone and getting in their physical space. And then she was like trying to get back a bit. And it just made me think, it seems like so much of what we do in this particular realm is unconscious. What do you think about how it seems like also that this type of information eludes a lot of people? So why do you think it's so important we do it so much and yet so few people know about it?
Well, if you think about a child, children are extremely good at reading adults. I always say to parents who have got young children, how often do your children push you to the edge but don't push you over the edge? And that's simply because they're able to they're reading your emotions. And kids will always be trying to figure out, what they can learn, but also not just to try and break us. They want to see where the wheel holds. So they test us all the time. And so they're expert readers. And if you think about it, we needed to be able to understand somebody's appearance, to be able to recognize them. So we need to be able to recognize facial features, to know whether that somebody is somebody that we should be around, that's a friend or is a foe. We also need to be able to understand emotions. So if somebody's angry, if they're dangerous, so if somebody that we shouldn't be around from their facial features, that we recognize them and they're angry, there's a good idea that we should get away from them as quickly as we can. But if it's somebody that we know, like a friend, and they're angry, well, we might want to come closer and find out why they're angry. But as a child, we read people expertly. Only a few children on the planet couldn't do it. They've got conditions where they find it difficult to recognize expressions, but most children, they do it just part of their nature. It's innate. But as we get older, we start to get involved in all the other things around us. And we know in NLP, we take in about 2 million bits of information every second through our senses, but we process about 134 bits, only a tiny fraction of it. So wherever we focus is where our attention's going to go. And so if we're not, if we're out there playing games, going to, school, learning, chasing boys, chasing girls, just playing, involving ourselves in life, we're not working at reading people. So it's like any muscle. If we don't work it, it atrophies. And so as we get older, it's just a skill that we've forgotten, but not completely forgotten because it's still in our unconscious mind. And I'd say that if any of the listeners, question for them is that if you had a moment in your life where you've been listening to somebody and everything sounded right, but you had that gut feeling something just wasn't right, that'll be because it's not just your intuition, because your intuition is really unconscious awareness of things. And so unconsciously, you've recognized the indicators that tell you that that person is not being true to the words they're saying, that their tone of voice, their body language, their expressions on their face don't align with what they're saying. And if we find that, what do we usually go with? We don't trust the person. So the unconscious indicators are extremely important, but as we get older, we just consciously forget to use them and then judge ourselves or question ourselves. Did I really read them right? What was it that I was really seeing? So all I do as a trainer is teach people how to build that muscle back that they had when they were a child. So I'm just a personal trainer when it comes to teaching people.
Yeah, it sounds like a fascinating skill to learn. How do you go from it being unconscious, as you say, to conscious behaviours? What would be the first few steps that you'd recommend?
Well, I always first of all, I get people to understand themselves. So by being able to understand your own traits, you know how other people are going to see you. And it empowers you. Excuse me. It's not a matter of going, well, I've got some traits that I'd like to get rid of. Well, it's part of my personality. But if I know that the upside of my traits and I know the downside of my traits, the upside show me where the strengths are, the downside show me how I'm going to be under pressure, how I'm going to respond. So I can set my environment up so they don't get triggered. But it's always a case of starting at the foundation, and that's understanding personalities, knowing how to read those. Many years ago, I used to work with companies where I tried to understand their staff, and I'd take them through what they call psychometric profiles, Myers-Briggs, DISC, and Enneagrams, and all those sort of systems. But I realised that when you ask people questions, they try and second guess what you're asking. If they're applying for a job, they'll try and you're putting them through one of those questionnaires, they'll try and second guess how they should answer it. And I realised that when I was working with a company that taught currency trading, and none of their students made any money, we put them through those sort of tests. We found that the results they were getting when we started putting them through their training, but especially when they went live with their training, they didn't match their personalities of the reports that were coming out of the questions. And I needed a better system. And I realised that the facial features give me all the information I need to know. So if you know how to read someone's face as far as the facial features go, you've got their personality. And then from there, you know how to speak to them. And then after that, you've got the body language and expressions that give you the feedback as to whether you've read them right. Is there something emotionally going on? And while you're talking to them, are they telling you the truth as well?
It's a really cool skill.
Yeah.
I know that we planned on talking about reading people in negotiation. And I definitely do want to get into that. But there's a couple of things which I really wanted to ask you about beforehand. Especially, I think people will be interested in your work with Disney. Would you mind talking about that for a bit?
Well, what happened back in 2016, Disney and Gillette were launching, they were launching the new outfits for Rogue One, for the Star Wars movie. At the same time, Gillette were using the players from Rogue One to advertise their new razor. And the two companies asked me to go to London to be interviewed by the world's press to explain the stories the face tells before you utter a single word. And so my job then was to be interviewed by the world's press, which was probably the biggest dream job that I could ever had. It was a 10-day holiday away for 3 hours work, paid quite handsomely, and that to be interviewed and get written up all over the world. It was a dream job. But Gillette were working on the fact that depending on how you groom yourself, you have a beard, I have a beard, how we cut that beard, how we trim it, how we shape it, will change the way, especially with our hair as well, how are we going to come across to other people? Because if you change the shape of your beard, you're going to completely change the appearance of what you've got on your face. And people, as I said before, we unconsciously judge people, we unconsciously profile them based on our past experiences. And so my job was to explain how you can change your appearance and therefore change the impact that has on other people.
Well, I hesitate to ask what you can see in my physical appearance right now. And I've been waiting to use the joke of this is what lockdown does to a man. But
the good thing is that I always say to people, look, your appearance, it's not about the aesthetics. And the reason I read people is not to manipulate, it's to understand them so I can communicate with them more effectively, so I can build a relationship. Because everything in this world is based on the relationships that we build.
Mm. So how did you say the press conference, how did it go?
It went brilliantly, because once the journalist started asking me, well, how does it work? I really just spent 3 hours profiling all of the journalists in front of me and asking each one, or they're with their team members. I turn around to their team members and explain, I'll take one person as a subject and explain to their team what I could see in their face and how they responded and everything else. And when all I had was smiles and gaping mouths when I was talking, I knew I was hitting the nail on the head on every case. And so
the funny thing about it is that it's kind of like turning the camera around, because they've got like the spotlight on you and you're basically reversing it. So you
That's
had
it.
some fun then, basically.
A lot of fun. Just on you said a moment ago about your own face. I know that when I look at you, you're analytical. You need to analyze things before you make a decision. So when you talk to people, you're also going to give them a lot of information. But there are going to be people who just want the slim overview. And when you're talking to them, you've found in your life that when you've been talking to people, some people, everything's going fine, and then they shut down, or they turn off, or they try and answer, push you along to get you to finish your sentences quickly. They try and finish your sentences for you. They'll be the people who just want a slim overview. Well, if you know who they are, you know how to speak to them. You can pre-frame a conversation and say to them, well, look, say it's George. Say, look, George, I know that there's a lot of information here, but what I'm going to do is give you the overview. You can ask the questions that you need to ask, but if there's something there that I think you need to know, but you haven't asked me, is it all right if I tell you that then? That person who usually doesn't like a lot of information goes, thank you very much. You give the overview, they ask their questions. And then if there's something that they haven't asked that they need to know, then that's when you'd say to them, look, remember before, George, I mentioned that there was some information you might need to know, that boring stuff, we're there now. Is that okay? And they'll usually giggle and say, yes, a bit of a laugh, and you just give them that information. And what you've done then is you've talked with them. You haven't talked at them.
Well, yeah, I like the, it's an accurate depiction of where I am. I like this format. I did go on other people's podcasts in the way that you're a guest at the moment. I did start off by doing a little bit of guest podcast, but I much prefer the host where I get to ask the questions. So yeah, it's an accurate analysis, as I'm sure it would be. So we talked about reading people in negotiation. Have you found it useful in your life, and could you give some examples of what that might look like for you?
Yeah, well, it comes down to the fact of it doesn't matter where I'm using the skills, it's still the same techniques that I'm using. So in a negotiation, for instance, it's going to be a case of understanding how much information they need, in what sort of order it needs to be. So it has to be structured, it's got to be formal. If somebody who's more formal in their approach, and therefore I know how to speak to them, because the first thing in all negotiations is tune your transmitter into the other person's receiver. Like if we're listening to the radio, yes, we tune our receivers into the transmitter because we know what the radio station's transmitting at. Its frequency might be 105.4. So we tune into that. But when we're trying to get our message across to somebody, they don't know what frequency we're transmitting at. We've got to realize what their receiver's tuned in at and change our transmitter to match theirs. So therefore, speaking in the way that they need to be spoken to. Once we've got that, we know that it's going to be an easier conversation. But then what I have, as I said before, I've got the body language and the expressions to give me feedback in that communication. I'll give you an example of one gentleman just in the middle of COVID, one of my clients. He got in touch with me and he said, look, I've just got a client here. We've finished a project. The client, won't pay the full amount. He wants a $50,000 discount. He's using the fact that COVID has made it really difficult for them. They don't have the money. And he's cancelled his next project. And I said, well, right, show me the email you were going to send this guy and show me his face, because I didn't need to see him in real life. All I needed to see was his photograph. And so from his photograph, I said, right, this guy's got a high level of confidence. He's got an authoritative trait as well. So if you come in and you talk down at him, which was what he was going to do in this email, telling him how he had to get paid the rest of the money, I said, you're going to have a fight all the way through. If you come in too low, he's going to treat you as somebody who's not at his level. So you've got to come in at the right level. And he knew how to then approach the guy in the first place to connect with him. And I said, right, once you got that connection, the first thing to talk about is not the money itself, but talk about the project that he's cancelled by saying to him that it was great that he'd postponed it, because it gave them time to think about it and realise the best way to go ahead with it, because he knows how they work, and he knows that they're very meticulous in the work that they do. And this gave them that time to even be more meticulous in how it was going to be put together. And then say to the guy, because if we put this one in place and by the end of COVID, which we expected or are hoping at that time to be around Christmas time, that he'd be leading the field, which meant a lot of money for him in the particular area, the industry he was in. And so then I said, right, talk to him about the fact that it relies on the relationship that we have. And you know, the relationship we had when we did the previous job and how well we were able to put things together, and continuing that relationship into this next project is really going to put you in the leading forefront of the industry. He got the message without them having to say, pay the extra 50,000. He paid the extra 50,000 and started the next project.
So how much was that consultation worth for them in the end?
Well, that one, from what I actually paid them, was part of the course that they were doing my master program, and someone doing my master program, working through some problems like that is just part of the deal. But the return to them was quite substantial. It ended up being a joint project with one of the universities, and that went into the millions of dollars. And so much bigger than the previous deal, but it wasn't just with him, it was with this other company as well. So I also profiled those people from the university for him and told him how to act in between, because this guy with this high level of authority would also, he'd get on well with the business development manager from the university, but I could see him clashing with the two researchers who were an integral part of the process. And if you put their noses out of joint, that would be a big problem in trying to get it back again. So I told him how to deal with the situation before it came up.
So did you feel like you'd underpriced yourself a little bit?
Yeah, what I've been doing with my work is I prefer to, excuse me, I prefer to train other people so that those other people can then take these skills and use them. One of my biggest focuses is to create and train my competition. We need more people doing it, but they've got to be doing it right. And if we look at coaching across the world, life coaching, for instance, we've got, it's the second fastest growing industry on the planet is coaching of all different forms. And that's because we are less connected to ourselves and each other than we've ever been before, even though device-wise, we've got more connections than we've ever had. And so with that, people are separated. And so more people came into the coaching world, but a lot of them haven't worked through their own stuff. And the last thing I wanted was people learning this, doing my online courses or whatever, and then going out and acting as though they're experts in it and just screwing it up for everybody. And that means then a lot of work in recovering that. So I realized I needed to find the best people, train them, and train them in a way in which they are the best in their industry. And that way, investing in them that way by giving them an easy way forward in financially as well, that I'm putting an investment in my future, in making sure that this will continue growing and it'll be a demand for it in greater numbers. The older I get, the demand will be just stronger and stronger.
Have you started to see that that's the case?
Yep, I've already got a number of people who put their hands up and are coming in to I call them competition. As I said, my target was to create and train my competition. But if you think about it, if I train them, they're not my competition. They're a strategic alliance. And they'll be a strategic alliance that I have well into the future. And because I'm always creating new resources for them, they can then, as affiliate partners, they can use my resources to promote their business, grow their business, and I make a return out of that as well. And I don't have to be running around putting all the work in myself. I can spend more time building resources, having an easier life. And as I'm approaching not far off 70 now, I don't want to be out there working flat out for the rest of my life, but I like to keep the company I've got. And by training other people, I've not just got clients that I've trained, but I've got friends that go well into the future. As I said, my business is about teaching people how to build stronger relationships, and I'm a product of my own business.
So how much, in terms of negotiation, how much do you think in terms of importance, how would you rank the importance of what you do in a negotiation environment?
It's extremely important. As I said, if you don't build a relationship with somebody, you're not going to get an outcome. And when you come to negotiations, this is even just with business owners and their staff. One of the biggest problems we had through COVID, I know that the biggest turnover of positions was leadership roles. With everybody working from home, the managers, executives of companies didn't know how to manage people who weren't sitting in the office where they could see them sitting at their desk. They were trying to deal with them remotely. And when people are remote, well, one of the things we found before COVID, 87% of people through the Gallup research were shown to be disengaged at their work. That increased with COVID. So if 87% of people didn't want to be at work, they only do what they have to do to get by, to keep their jobs. So managers started micromanaging them, and they then learned very quickly what things they had to focus on and what things they could then ignore, and their productivity dropped again. The more you micromanage somebody, the more productivity disappears. And so the end result, we had all these people that weren't pulling their weight. And so being able to build that relationship with your staff, understand them, treat them in a way in which they feel that they belong, that they contribute, that they have a place, and then they become part of the organization. They take an invested interest in its growth. There's a negotiation there. I think a lot of people are thinking about hard negotiations. You've got two battling sides and it's trying to go, okay, let's compromise. How do we get this through? What do I have to give? What do you have to give? Well, if you're able to read somebody and understand them, you can talk to them in a way, excuse me, by finding out more about how they like to think and process, that you don't have to give anything away. You just talk in a different way. You deliver things in a different way, that the other person feels that they got everything they want, and you'll get everything you want as well. So a true negotiation is both sides winning and nobody needing to give up anything in the process.
Mm. Have you got any obvious red flags, if you will, where someone, I think you've said previously, where their actions or their body language doesn't meet their words? Have you got any red flags that you'd point out where someone who's not as trained as you are, they could pinpoint it and maybe try and address it?
Well, I usually say to people, trust your gut, because everybody, as I said before, is a profiler. You pick things up. Now, two reasons why you may not trust somebody. One, because their body language, their expressions, all of those nonverbal indicators don't match with what they're saying. Or it could also be somebody who reminds you of somebody who's done the wrong thing by you in the past, and therefore you just don't trust them. So you question yourself on that and you go, right, what was I seeing there? Is this, does this person remind me of somebody? And I do a quick check on that myself and go, does that face remind me of somebody who did the wrong thing by me? And I try and look at everything where I might have my bias in place, question that first. And if I can't find a fault with that, then I can pretty well be sure that I've picked something up in their nonverbals that didn't match what they were saying. And then I go, okay, then that's the case. But then I never assume I've got anything. Even when as I said, I've profiled tens of thousands of people. I've profiled people on radio. I've profiled them on, I've had clients, I've been in a studio, they've had their listeners on the phone and they've sent their photographs in early, and I've profiled their faces while they were on air, and they could say whether it was true or not. And even in that situation, I get positives every time. But I still don't have the arrogance to say that if I look at your face and say, this is your personality, and you say, no, that's not right, I'm not going to stand there and say, this is your personality and really get strict about it. This is why I use the body language and the expressions. I'm looking for the feedback. I check myself every time, no matter how many people I've read and how accurate I've been. So it's always then look for more indicators. If you go, something's not right here, look for other things that are lining up and telling you that, hey, something else is not right. I know that when I grew up, we used to, in the lounge rooms in Australia, we used to have, or our parents used to have, ducks on the wall. There were 3 plaster ducks, a big one at the bottom, a smaller one above it, and a small one above that, all flying in the one direction. And the old saying back then was, when you're putting your plans together, get your ducks in a row. To make sure everything's lining up in the same direction, so to speak. And so that's what I do. I look for indicators. If there's an indicator that says, oh, something's wrong here, then I don't just go, there's something wrong. I go, okay, what else am I seeing? What else is telling me that things aren't right? It's like the old saying that if somebody with folded arms is closed off. Well, it could be that they're cold. It could be that they're intimidated by you. They're interested in what you've got to say, but they give themselves a warm hug while they're listening to you. What's the rest of the body telling you? Are they leaning forward? Are they feet facing towards you? Are they leaning in? Are they nodding? Are they asking you questions? If that's the case, then the folded arms mean nothing. What I'm looking for then is when the folded arms become unfolded, I know they're even more open now to what I'm talking about, and they become comfortable. Whatever was causing them to fold their arms, like being intimidated or whatever, that's now dissipated. It's gone.
Mm.
So make sure you've got all your ducks in a row.
How much do you work with micro expressions?
A great deal, because that's the feedback, that and the body language. They tell me what the person's emotions are. And as I said, if I'm talking to them or they're talking to me, the micro expressions and body language, they tell me whether they're lying or not, whether they're being truthful.
So, a slight informal question. Have you watched Lie to Me?
Yep. I got interested in that because I found that Paul Ekman, who was the gentleman, the psychologist who did all the research on the micro expressions back in 1969, I think it was, when he started his training. He was doing his thesis. He went to Papua New Guinea, to where the Faray tribe had never seen a white man before in their life. In fact, he was the first one. No radios, no TVs. And there used to be a belief, Charles Darwin, when he traveled the world, had said that he couldn't understand what people were saying when we went to these islands, but he could understand their emotions through their expressions. All the anthropologists for the next 95 years were saying, no, that's rubbish. He's talking about that being hardwired, being part of our nature traits, where the anthropologists were saying, no, it's nurture, it's cultural. Well, Paul proved that there were 7 expressions which are universal. It doesn't matter if you've been born in a capital city, a tribal village, or you've been blind from birth. If you feel any one of those 7 expressions, you will have the corresponding, emotions, I should say. You feel any one of those 7 emotions, you will have the corresponding expression on your face. And so if you're feeling angry, you'll have an angry look on your face. Even somebody who's blind, if they're angry, they'll have that expression on their face. And so being able to read that is so important. A micro expression is just a quick twitch. That when something happens or something is said around you, unconsciously we react. Then our conscious mind steps in and shuts it off. So this is why we can use it for detecting whether someone's telling the truth, because unconsciously they've responded where their conscious mind hasn't been active in the situation. So that's going to be a true emotion. And then they switch it to another emotion. Well, we know that's a conscious mind that's been put in place, and we can very quickly realize that, hey, they've been telling a furphy here. They haven't been telling the truth.
So, how quickly would you say that you get a good read on someone? And would you give yourself a percentage in terms of how accurate the read is?
Well, when I did my training with Paul Ekman's group with the micro expressions, at about 1/10 of a second, I averaged about 96% accurate. And it's something that it's like anything though. If I don't practice it, it atrophies. So it's like riding a bike. Once you start doing it, you get back and do it again, you pick it up really quickly. But the whole thing is, as I said, one indicator on its own is still not enough. I get one thing that then directs me on what questions to ask. So this is where I'm surprised that lawyers don't use it more in courts, for instance. To say somebody had a twitch on their face, well, that's inadmissible. But the twitch gives you an indication, the expression gives you an indication that something's not right here. And that then gives you the information on how do I then change the questions? What questions do I ask here to try and uncover the truth? Because in law, it's got to be the words that are spoken. They've got to be proven or disproven. The expressions, because not everybody can read them, you can't use that as evidence. But you can use it as the guide that helps you to then find the evidence that you need.
Mm. Well, they do that in Lie to Me, don't they? So
that's it. And that series was very accurate. The first series, very accurate. Second series, not so accurate. Third series, with all their throwaway lines, were pretty much throwaway lines, because when Paul joined them, he intimidated everybody because, and I get the same thing. People go, oh, you can read people, and they get all nervous. And I go, but I'm not reading you to manipulate you. I'm reading you to understand you, to have a better relationship with you. And this is very much Paul's attitude. So he's a very gentle giant. He's there to teach them how to then make sure they did this accurately in the movie, in the series. But after they get, it's like anybody, you get used to somebody, you start to, familiarity, as they say, breeds contempt. And so after a while, they weren't so worried about, being accurate. And as the next series came along, and then Paul finally left them, and it just became entertainment. But if people want to learn how to read expressions, get the first series out and have a bit of a watch, because there's a lot of truth in the information they're given there. Because, as I said, Paul was the man behind it.
Well, there is an episode where the main character, I forget what his name is now, but he sort of stumbles on a guy who he's quite concerned by, maybe a psychopath, for lack of a better term. Have you ever encountered someone who you thought, not sure about that individual?
Well, psychopaths are very good at playing a role, because they have three types of people that they deal with. There are those that they ingratiate themselves to, who are assets to them. Then those that are people they use, and everybody else they ignore. So if you're in a situation where you're either one of the first two, where they're ingratiating themselves to you, where you think they're fantastic, or they've been using you and abusing you, then you're going to be completely different in the way you feel. The person who's best suited to be able to pick them up is one of the people that they ignore, because they're sitting back and they can watch the variation of their behaviors. Because when they're dealing with one person, they're all over and they're friendly and everything else, and they talk to the other person and they're putting them down. And so sitting back from a distance, you can see more. So the best way to deal with any situation, the more that you can separate your emotions out of it by stepping back from it, the more you're going to pick up. That's why watching interviews on TV and things like that, you can pick up very quickly who's telling the truth and who's not. And one thing that everybody who's listening to this can actually try is record, a news interview. And when you play it back, do it with the sound off. Watch the expressions, really focus in on the body movements and everything else. And when you haven't got the words there to distract you, it's surprising what you'll pick up. You'll see little changes in the expressions and things. And once you've watched it a couple of times and you know exactly where that appears in the reel itself, then play it with the sound on. And then I guarantee your jaw will drop and you go, oh, I would have missed that before, but now I can see what's going on. Because think about it. At school, we are told, concentrate, listen to what's being said here. We focus on the words at school. We don't focus on watching. As I say to people, people say we've got two ears and one mouth. And I go, no, we've also got two eyes, two ears and one mouth. Use them in that proportion. The more you can sit back and listen, but very much use your eyes and observe, you'll be surprised how much you can pick up. But when you're learning this stuff, if you isolate one and then just use the other, you'll really start to fine tune that. Whereas if you've got the sound as well as the movements and everything else, it's not as easy to pick up. As I say, if you lose your sight, for instance, all of a sudden your feelings of touch will be magnified, your smell will be magnified, your senses. And so by shutting down one of the senses and concentrating on what I'm seeing, you'll start to observe a lot more in people.
Is that what you did for practice?
That's one of the things that I do. And I like sitting in cafes and things like that, watching people in shopping centres, watching people from a distance and watching the interactions where I can't hear what's being said, but I can see the expressions and I can see right at the point when somebody has been getting on with somebody really well. And then at that moment when the rapport has been broken. Like
it's a couple, for instance. Skill. I love it. Can I ask how your work has changed due to Zoom?
It's meant that, well, before Zoom, I've been training on using Zoom now. Before COVID came along, I was using Zoom for 2014. I think pretty much when it first started. I've been using Skype before that. As soon as Zoom came out, I switched over. And I found, because I'm training people all over the world, it's not so much training locals. And the other thing too is a lot of the locals, I've also said to them, well, we can train via Zoom. And the good thing is like we're recording this session now, if I got someone on Zoom and I'm training them, I record the session and give them a copy of it. So they got their notes from there, which means we can spend more time in really getting into the conversation. Whereas if I'm training them face-to-face with people out in, say, like the public, yes, we've got all those resources walking around a shopping centre that we can use as part of the training, but they've got to then take their own notes. So it's a bit of both worlds. So some of my clients, I train a bit in the on the Zoom and a bit of the time in, or part of the time in cafes and other things. So we mix it up a bit. But on Zoom, if you've got a good connection like we have here, the micro expressions are going to come out. I can't see the body language from the lower body. I can't see what you're doing with, from your shoulders, from your chest down. But then it just means I have to focus more in on the face. And so it just means that I've just been able to, it's like a dance. Put me in a different situation, I just flow the techniques through and use them in a different way in each situation. But and it then trains me to be able to use the techniques in any given situation.
Well, I suppose it helps as well, based on what you previously said about shutting off part of the senses to focus more on the other one. So you can hone in on one more than the other, I suppose.
That's it. I'll give you an idea. If I'm doing, I've got an executive that I have to call, and it's going to be on the phone. One of the things I'm going to do, first of all, is I jokingly tell everybody I'm a social media stalker. I'm going to find their face somewhere. It'll be on LinkedIn or their websites or Facebook, wherever I can find them. And I'll have that on the screen next to me while I've got them on the phone. And as I introduce myself and we start talking, I go, can I ask you a question? And in your case, I would have said, have you ever found, I mentioned before about having people who might switch off when you've been talking to them. Another one I would say with you, Thomas, is, well, have you walked up to people in the past and some people actually step back away from you? And I'll pull a trait that I can see on your face and talk about a person who's got the opposite trait and the interaction. Because I know you're very affable. You'll stand close to people comfortably when you meet them for the first time. Somebody who's more discerning, they will need a bit of space because they like to check out who's safe to be around. And once they've worked that out, they're as safe as anybody else. So if you step in next to them, they will move back from you. And so knowing that, how to read that, that's going to put you in an advantage. So, but in that conversation, I pulled a couple of traits out and the person goes, but where are you getting this from? Oh, I'm getting that from your face, but we're on the phone. Oh, sorry, I've got your photograph here on your LinkedIn profile. And they're going, but I said, I got it from your photograph. And they go, you got that from my photograph? And I go, yes, if I can get that from your photograph and you had the same skills and you were dealing with your staff, do you think that you would have a better relationship with them? You would understand them more. You'd be able to build better connections with them. You'd be able to get greater loyalty. Yeah, and I go, and your salespeople, if they could read your customers that way, do you think that they'd be able to recognize their buying motives? They recognize how to value add to the sale, that they would know how to do the sale in a faster fashion, and that you would have loyal customers? And they go, yeah. And I go, okay, when do we meet? There's my cold call. And so again, by just understanding, and while I'm talking to them on the phone, all I've got now is their tone of voice. And the body language translates into the tone of voice. You try, if they're sitting and they're talking very softly and everything else, and all of a sudden they're talking, the greater volume and everything else, I know they've shifted their physical position as well. They've gone from a sitting back position and coming up vertical, and I'm picking that up because now all my concentration is on the tone of voice that I'm picking up. And so it's just shifting it around.
Can I ask if anyone has read you?
Yep. The first thing I did when I first learnt, the lady who taught me, English lady who lives in California, Naomi Tickle, she's in her 80s now, she profiled me. And yeah, she picked the traits. And also I go back over my own traits as well, because it's important to know your own personality. Because as I said, there's a lot of traits that we have. There is no right or wrong trait. Every trait has an upside and every trait has a downside. I have critical perception, which means you put a document in front of me, as long as I haven't written it, but if somebody else puts a document in front of me, errors will jump off the page at me. If I walk into a room and something's out of kilter, like a picture slightly out of angle on the wall, I'll pick it up. And that's brilliant from that black and white situation, the tangibles. But the downside of that trait is that I can imagine, with people who've got critical perception, can imagine something's going on emotionally. And once I knew I had that trait, it explained to me why I'd been through so many relationships, and I've been through 2 divorces. That was one of my traits that didn't work for me. It held me back. So once I knew that, when I'm dealing with somebody, I'm always checking and going, right, my response towards them, my feelings towards them, has that got anything to do with my trait? And if it is, I go, aha, that's my trait. I know what that is. And I can then make sure I deal with it, so that instead of the traits controlling me, I can take dominion over them, so to speak. Because if you don't know your personality, your buttons get pushed all the time and you go, why do I keep acting that way? Well, that was one thing I read that in everybody else, and I needed to know that in myself. So first target, read yourself, understand yourself, know where you are on the world scale. Don't look at it as being a downfall of any of your traits. Like dramatic appreciation, if someone's got that, they're a natural presenter, which means they're going to be great on stage. They're going to be great in front of an audience presenting. But they also, to the rest of us who have aesthetic appreciation, they're drama queens. But that's only a problem that I have, not that they have, because they express themselves and they don't get stressed out. Being aesthetic, I keep it all in. And by keeping it in, then as it builds up, when it comes out, it can be a bit of a volcano. So I've learned that that's one of my traits. So I need to moderate that trait when I'm under stress, find a way in which to talk to people, let some of that stress off without it coming into a violent outburst. And so knowing yourself is just so important. It puts you in a position of power over yourself. And therefore, you know how to change the situations around you, your environment, so that you can work on your strengths and always have those flourishing, because that's where you're most productive and happy. And you can keep the downside at bay.
Like another form of self-knowledge.
That's it. The more we know ourselves, the more that we're going to be happy in ourselves, and at the same time have better reactions and connections with other people.
Mm. Can I ask about your awards? How did they come about? And you've got plenty. So is there a story behind that?
Yeah, well, one of the things, I've been working in the field, as I said, with the face reading since about 2008, so 12 going on 13 years now. When people first heard about it, they thought, oh, face reading, there's a bit clairvoyancy. How can I look at a face and then read someone's face? Where's the science in that? Well, the biggest thing was getting people to understand what the science was. If you lift weights, you're going to build muscles in your body. Everything we feel inside, we express outwardly. That's why the body language and the expressions, the micro expressions work. You put that together, if you concentrate in a certain way, if you look at me, I've got these little lines, vertical lines between my eyebrows. That's because I pull my face in, I concentrate and I crunch it in. My eyelids start to get concealed because the eyelashes go up underneath. The eyelid goes under that fold of skin because I'm pulling it down all the time and concentrating. So when I know that, if I pull an expression over and over again, I'm going to create ridges and crevices on my face. And that's how why the facial features work. They're a roadmap of how a person likes to think and process. That's their personality, not their character, but their personality. So 2 people can look very similar to each other. One could be a saint, one could be a sinner. They're both processing information the same way, but their intent and what they're processing can be completely different. That comes down to character. And that's why being able to read someone's body language and micro expressions when I'm talking to them, I've got their personality, I've got their emotions, and then I'm looking for mismatches in there, and I've got their character pretty quickly as well. But then with that, I realized that over that period of time, most people didn't know, but when COVID hit, that was when I was getting a lot more people calling me and needing help. I'd had a lot of parents with their children at home and not being able to connect with them, a lot of kids with Asperger's and autism, and excessive medication when they didn't need to be. You understand the child, you know how to talk to them, you change the environment around them, and things change. And so that started coming forward. I was working with a group who talked me into being entered into one of the awards, and that just took off. So this 2020, I was a finalist in 8 different awards. some of them local in the local area, the region, some of them national and some international. So it's mostly around education services, professional services, and also I run a group called the Campfire Project, which is a safe place on Facebook, which originally for men to be able to come in and tell their stories. They came in, tell their stories, brought them into panel discussions, had women in there from day one. So we have an area where we have men and women having conversations, in-depth and deep conversations with respect with each other. Instead of being separate little groups looking at each other as the problem, they're standing shoulder to shoulder looking at the problems and working on the problems together. And so that was up for a national award as a wellness program and initiative for Australia. And I end up walking away with the business person of the year for the Hunter region, which is the biggest area outside of a capital city. Also education services and the overall business of the year for Australia, New Zealand through one of the other groups.
Well, I think that definitely merits an applause. So well done. Congratulations on all that. And I'd like to ask, other than the training your competitors, which you touched upon, have you got any goals?
Yeah, well, one of my goals is to have a lot more people doing this. It's always building stronger connections. The Campfire Project is just going from strength to strength. My attitude to everything in life is that if you're a leader, your job is to make yourself redundant. Because if you don't, you're in a position where there's no growth for you. You're creating yourself a prison. When I worked for our national telephone carrier, my job there was to raise everybody else up, and I took redundancy and left the organisation so I could move on to my next area. I was a surf lifesaver where I was in charge of one patrol at one stage, the next year in charge of the whole club, and the next year after that in charge of 3 clubs. And my job there was to raise one of the other members up to take over the club captain's job so I could go on and do something else. And a few of the members who didn't really like me that much took a lot of pleasure in saying to me that he was a better club captain than I was. And then they got upset because I'm smiling. And they go, "What are you smiling for?" I said, "Because that was the target. I can't have them being less than me. They've got to be equal to what I've done. And if what I really want them to be is greater than me." And the same thing with the Campfire Project. We've got people coming up through there. And as I say, a lot of people say, "It's my group. It's my bus and I drive the bus." And I go, "Well, I built the bus. I've been driving the bus. Now I'm slipping into the passenger seat where the view is a lot more comfortable and others are driving the bus. So I can then go on and do something else within the Campfire Project, or with the hashtag We Together initiative I created, I can then go on and do other things in those areas." So for me, it's the most important thing I've ever learned is the next thing I learn after I think I know everything. And at the same time, my attitude is that what you do for yourself dies with you, but what you do for others and for the community isn't always will be eternal. Put those two things together, it means I'm always going to be growing. And so I'm always looking at what's the next thing that I can do? And how can I then share that with other people and have them be able to come up and do a better job than I did? And that's my pleasure. My youngest student at the moment is my 12-year-old granddaughter. And she is blitzing it. She's doing a fantastic job. So by the time she gets to my age, I will look like a kindergarten student. She'll be so proficient at this. And that's what gives me the greatest pleasure, is to know other people take it on and they do a better job because the people they're dealing with get better results.
I think you've given tons of value, and it's a fascinating topic. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Where is the best place for people to find you?
The best place is to find me on my website, which is just my name, Alan Stevens, AlanStevens.com.au for Australia. Go to my website. They can contact me through the contact form there. But I always say to people, go and check out the success stories. There's about 6 different categories in there, looking at schools, in raising children, mental health, coaching, business, etc., where people have talked about what they've got out of it. As I say, you may be impressed by what I've said. Don't take it on gospel. Go out, find out about it, test it for yourself. And in that way, you learn and you grow yourself. So go to that website and check out those stories, and you'll see how other people have got some great results. I've got people who are doing reviews after reviews, testimonial after testimonial, year after year. And I've only worked with, well, one lady 10 years ago with a son when I profiled him. And when he was 6 years old, boy with Asperger's, and the results that they've achieved, she's still doing testimonial videos for me today, which is still getting results from what they've learnt and they've taken on board. But I showed them and they've kept growing from it. So that's the best place for people to go. Find out what other people have said and then go and test it for yourselves.
Thank you again. I've loved talking to you, and yeah, I'll just thank you, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Bye
Alan.
for now.